So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dinesh Minocha, who will introduce the afternoon keynote.
Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon. I'm Dinesh Minocha. I've had the honor of being on the faculty here for almost 23 years. It's so nice to see so many of the former students and colleagues here. So, as some of you know, being a faculty is quite an interesting job. I don't know how I managed 23 years. Somebody asked me, what do you think are the good and not so good things about the job? And I started thinking about it. I said, the best thing of an academic, at least my perspective, is when we get students from all over the world, and when they come to you, they are young, naive, innocent, and they sometimes come to an idea with an idea, what do you think? And you jump off from it, that's a grand idea. So the best thing of your job is you're working with students who are super smart, much smarter than us. Well, that's okay. And other thing of being faculty job is like parenting. You see a kid who was born and how they grow up. So the next speaker, Professor Ramesh Raskar, I had the physics profile very well. Almost 20 years ago, in July 1995, I was visiting Iowa, only one time in my life, in a cornfield. I was at a conference. A guy comes to me, about the same height as you, same nose features, 40 pounds lighter, or something like that, and comes to me and tells me that I'm going to join UNC. As I look back, so it's about 19 years and 10 months, so I show this is my real honor and privilege to see a person I met so long ago, how he came. He came to UNC, he worked with Professor Henry Fuchs and Greg Welch. He went to Mitsubishi Lab, and he went to MIT. From a student to a researcher to a star to a superstar to a giant, something like that. And if you look at the work he has done, I was thinking about the areas that he has not worked in. It's maybe easier for me to count. Computer graphics, display, vision, inverse imaging, human-computer interaction. Now, not only has he done some amazing work in terms of technology development, one other thing about Ramesh is impact. Impact is not just publishing papers, filing patents, but he's also working on technologies which can make a difference to a large population in the world. One of the projects that really got excited, we all have eye-corrected glasses. We go to ophthalmologists, and we pay a couple of $100 with that heavy equipment. Ramesh and his group have done amazing work. A lot of people in the world don't have the access to the equipment. How can you take your cell phone and come with corrected vision? And more recently, he's been telling me he's involved with the project. There's a thing, it happens in India called Kumbh Mela. Happens every few years when 30 million people go for this kind of ritual. Can you imagine what challenges come up if 30 million people come to your town? So he's working with a big group of people in how to use technologies to make the experience better. But again, it's my real honor and privilege to welcome Professor Ramesh Raskar from MIT, and let's hear from him for making invisible invisible. Give him a big hand.
Right. Thank you, Dinesh. It's real. Of course, it's an honor and privilege, but also a very emotional moment, I have to say, to be sitting in front of all the people who taught us everything that we need to know about research, about technology, about growing up, and alums who have graduated before me, and new ones who are here, some of my housemates who know, how I have survived these places, and also my family. So my group at MIT is passionate about making the invisible visible. Cameras that can see around corners, cameras that can read a book without opening it, cameras that can see through occluders, cars can drive through fog, and so on. And what I thought today I would do is talk a little bit about this notion of making invisible visible in a broader way. There are a lot of things that are invisible. And what are some things we can do? And also share a little bit about my own experience becoming first a student, then a researcher in the industry, and then academia. So before we talk about things becoming visible, let's talk about things becoming invisible. So I was returning a rental car after SIGGRAPH in Anaheim, and I saw this sign at Avis, and I looked at the top right, and it's like there's a cassette and tapes. What are these guys talking about? And kind of chuckled. And then I looked at some other parts. I mean, clearly cassettes and tapes have disappeared. What are some other things will disappear, you think? What about the wallet? Will disappear. The camera has almost disappeared. We heard from Mark this morning. The keys might disappear with digital keys. And the glasses may as well. And I think if we keep going in this direction, a lot of things are going to become invisible, imperceptible, and they're going to become part of our life. Maybe they'll all merge into a phone, but as you know, we have augmented reality, virtual reality, maybe personal drones, or tooth implants for microphones, and they will disappear as well. So in terms of emerging technology, I think it's a pretty interesting, exciting, but also scary world out there. But there's another dimension, which is emerging worlds. And I was just talking to Gary over lunch about his passion on creating assistive technologies. There's a whole population, whether you're physically challenged because you're digitally disconnected or you're in a developing country. I think over the next few years, we're going to see 5 billion people become digital in many ways. And I think these two trends are intersecting. Emerging technologies and emerging worlds. And I think a community like ours has to really think about how we're going to participate in this conversation. Because if you think about emerging worlds, if you think about developing countries, there's a lot of excitement going on, but we are slightly removed from it. And we don't understand what are some interesting research statements, what are some problems, what are some opportunities. So there's something more we can do while the so-called South-South conversation is going on between developing countries. And we can be part of the conversation in this country. So when I started at MIT about 6 years ago, I started a lab. I was already out for about 7 years. And then when I started my group, I realized the students have to take classes and appear for various qualifying exams. And only after 2 or 3 years, they're going to start thinking about these big problems and start doing research. And I was very impassioned. I said, who's going to wait for 3 years? I'm already here. And so I started telling my incoming students in my group all kinds of shortcuts of what can you do to speed up the way you think, speed up the way you acquire knowledge. And I just wrote down a few formulas, not mathematical formulas, formulas for thinking. And I want to share with you a little bit about those formulas and also tell you how a lot of my interactions here in Carolina became part of this tidbits. So emerging technologies, emerging worlds, very confusing. Where do you start when you want to invent and do new research? And so for that, there's a very simple strategy. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you want to invent, there's something simple you can do. If you hear a great idea X, simply ask a question, what is next? And everything I'm going to tell you is common sense. You already know it, but it's good to have a mental map, a framework that allows you to play with it. And I have used this worldwide in many workshops, and it works really well. And unfortunately, my students have been kind of the first experimenters to use this strategy. And to do that, all we're going to do is perform some algebra in the basic idea X. And computationally, we can create more and more. Most of the ideas we come up with will not make any sense, but it'll be a mechanism to start inventing, start researching, start problem solving. Okay? So let's get started with a very toy problem. If somebody told you there's a great idea where you can share photos, and that's called Flickr, what would be your next idea? Share videos, share 3D geometry, share all those things. And that's what YouTube was. And so what did YouTube do? It basically went from a two-dimensional data to a two-dimensional plus time, three-dimensional data. And of course, Flickr was sold for just a few tens of million, and YouTube was sold for $1.6 billion. Right? Of course, they did more than just going one dimension up. But the idea is straightforward, which is you can take anything you know about a particular domain and then apply it to, generalize it or apply it to the next dimension. Okay? Sometimes it's not very obvious. I mean, Wikipedia is for text, but what's Wikipedia for images or video? It's not very obvious, but it's good to get that started. And you can also ask questions like, oh, if there's airbags for cars, airbags for what else?
Bicycles.
Bicycles, micro, macro, airbags for aircrafts, right, or helicopters. And at Carolina, I know Professor Brooks taught us that we are toolsmiths, and what really matters is how others are using our tools. And so that's the key. I think we should be always exploring these other dimensions and trying to generalize it. All right, let's move on to the second strategy. If you have an idea X, fuse that with another idea Y, but the more dissimilar they are, the more spectacular the fusion. So we have been doing a lot of work in light field displays with Henry Fuchs, Professor Fuchs, Andrew, is Andrew here? And some of my group members, Gordon Weststein, Doug Landman, Matt Hirsch. And we worked on it for quite some time, and we said this light field display is a great idea, but why don't we marry that with human perception? And that's the why, prescription glasses. Because as much as we want to see 3D, actually there are 40% of the world population who need 2D prescription glasses. So what if we just put our prescription on the displays? So the rest of the world will still look blurred, but the displays will look sharp. And that's our vision correcting display idea. That's the X plus Y. And the thing I really learned at Carolina was to think big and bold. And I didn't do it right in the first couple of years as a faculty, but very quickly I realized that the best way to keep your peace and still make progress is to just focus on big and bold ideas, because it takes same amount of effort whether you're working on random short ideas or big and bold ideas. And so when I was here, I got to work on Office of the Future and pixel planes and highball, just amazing projects, huge challenges, and really inspiring us to go to the next level. And recently I was at Apple and saw this very interesting quote of Steve Jobs. If you do something and it turns out pretty good, then you should go do something else wonderful. Not dwell on it for too long, just figure out what's next. So he's talking about what's next as well. It's a very interesting quote, because the moment you do something big, it's time to do something else. So this is challenging. I saw this quote very recently, but when I started my group, I laid down these 5 principles of how we should pick big topics. And I call it strive for 5, the older recommendation of 5 servings of fruits and vegetables. And just like, that's the intention, but we don't really get 5 servings. I think the same in research. This is our intention. So not every project will have these 5 principles, but it's good to keep it in mind. So what are those 5 principles? First is try to be among the first 5 teams that are working on it. You don't have to be the first, but try to be among the first 5. Try to do something that's going to last beyond 5 years. If you go to sleep and somebody else will do that anyway in the next year or 2, it's not big enough. It should be something that if you wake up after 5 years, still the world hasn't solved it. The world needs you. You should be able to explain the impact of what you're doing in 5 stages to your grandma. It should be that close to human impact. And it should be beyond 5 minutes of instruction. If you can just tell a junior person in 5 minutes what the concept is, what should be done, and come back after 5 months, and the junior person can do it anyway, it's probably not your core contribution. And try to fuse 5 or more expertise in whatever the field you are in. First of all, it's fun to work in teams where different folks have different expertise, but also that it's a grand challenge, because others need such teams as well, and that's an automatic barrier to entry for others, and that allows you to be among the first 5 and be still able to go for next 5 years without too much competition. So again, these are very ambitious 5 principles, but it's worth keeping in mind. So what are we trying to do in my group? over the next few years. This is unpublished work. So we're trying to create new types of CAT scan machines that can go in a rickshaw in a developing country. And although a typical CAT scan machine requires 15 Gs of acceleration, we have new solutions where we can completely eliminate the mechanical movement of the spinning X-ray sources and detectors, and also use extremely low power X-ray sources. Or we're trying to create a $100 film, not film, $100 film. And very much like you could go to a Walgreens and do a blood pressure cuff, in the future, you might be able to measure fluorescence tagged circulating tumor cells, because we can measure the fluorescence lifetime of tagged cells. And this is a well-known technique. It's very, very expensive because you have to measure this lifetimes in which are roughly a nanosecond scale. But we have new techniques that allow us to distinguish between lifetimes, scattering parameters, as well as the distance, which adds to also the travel time together. Or we are creating new types of oral imaging solutions by exploiting the fact that with different spectrum, different scattering coefficients, different global direct separation, you can actually create images that can be very similar to what you would get through X-rays. Or we're creating a new kind of RF cameras that have pixels, very much like you would imagine in an optical domain, but the pixels in the RF domain, so it can interact with the world in a very natural way without any cameras, because the RF can penetrate through walls. Okay, so let's keep moving with our hexagon. The third strategy, given a hammer, find all the nails, not just the original nail you're supposed to hammer. And this takes me back to also 20 years, Dinesh, because in my very first class, an amazing instructor told me this story about Bressenham line drawing. And those of you remember Bressenham, it's a strategy to draw a line that otherwise would require floating point calculations, but by using purely integer calculations. And this professor told this amazing story about it's not just for drawing lines, but actually when you want to do video interpolation and figure out if you have to change the frame rate of a video and you have to do an interpolation of which frame goes where, you can also use the same Bressenham algorithm. Do you know who that professor was? It's Gary Bishop, Professor Bishop. So given a hammer, find all the nails. And this takes me back to my own childhood. This is my picture when I was 9 years old, right? But what's interesting about this picture is that this is the youngest picture of me. I have no pictures from 0 to 9. Okay? And the only reason this picture was taken is because my father thought I'm going to win some kind of a scholarship in a competition, and we needed this photo to go in there. So it's amazing. I mean, now we have pictures, ultrasound picture even before the baby comes out, and of course, you know, you have pictures of every second that goes on. So, you know, I didn't have a camera, I didn't use a computer till I was 16. You know, you hear all the stories of how folks started using computer when they're 5 years old, and I didn't do any of that. I didn't speak English till I was about 16. And when it comes to photography, it was kind of my own camera of my own mind that I used to use. You know, I would just frame pictures with my eye, and I had this illusion that if I turn my head, there's nothing really behind me. And if I move fast, as I'm moving, somebody's painting the image for me in real time. And this is like the peekaboo effect children have. They have problem with persistence. And usually goes away in the first few years, but for me lasted till I was about 15. And then only after I started reading some newspapers and my father explained to me like, oh, this thing's happening in Europe and this other thing is happening elsewhere. Eventually I said, maybe the world does exist more than what I'm experiencing. It's not just being painted for me. And if you think about it, that's exactly what virtual reality is. You know, we're only creating the world for a given person, and as you move, you're painting the pixels in real time. If you move really fast, of course, you're going to swim. So I think I was obsessed with imagery, you know, even though I didn't have a camera or a computer, and didn't even have my own photo. So I think from that I have come a very long way with images, with movies that we can record at virtually trillion frames per second. Fast enough to create slow motion movies of light in motion. So here we have a packet of photons that's being injected in a bottle with some milky water. And you'll see as the light propagates through this bottle, it scatters, some of the light leaks out on the table. Most of the photons hit the cap and they explode. And then there is a pocket of a bubble of air at the top of the bottle, and light is bouncing around it. And then after several picoseconds, you get this concentration of light at the back of the bottle because of the parabolic reflector that's in the front of the bottle. Right? So we did this work a few years ago, very exciting, and it has really spawned a whole bunch of research in my group. So this was an amazing hammer that we can start to see light in motion. Right? With that, we can create new types of photography. This is time-lapse with about 25 picoseconds between each picture. We can start seeing around corners beyond line of sight. To do that, you would shine light on the door. Part of the light reflects in the room. A tiny fraction comes back to the door, and even tinier fraction back to the camera. And by analyzing these multiple bounces of light, you can just start creating 3D shapes of what's around the corner. I mean, this is basically global illumination in reverse. Right? I mean, nature is painting the world with global illumination, one path length at a time. And we can inverse that and start understanding the world. So our work was published at various places, and now we're looking at various applications such as cars that can avoid collision of what's around the bend, or look for survivors in hazardous conditions by shining light through visible parts of the building and looking at reflected signatures, or endoscopes that can be at a convenient location but then explore multiple channels in parallel. All right, so that was our strategy number 3. Given hammer, find all the nails, whether it's a Brossenham's line drawing or a new technique to see light in motion. So where else can we apply? Think about App Store. Such an amazing idea that a value of a product continues to improve well after it's sold. So why don't we have the same hammer for everything else? Why don't we have an app store for every piece of electronics, whether it's your microwave, your car, your fridge, and so on? And why has it taken more than 10 years for some of these platforms to become open enough to improve their value well after they're sold? All right. First of all, this idea hexagon is not just about technology. You can apply it for anything. You know, if you're planning your next vacation, you can apply the same algebra. X was your previous year's vacation. You know, can you take it to another dimension? Can you add something to it? Can you do exactly opposite of what you did last year? And so on. Or when you're planning your next dinner party. All right. Strategy number 4 is X++. Take the idea X, and to that add your favorite adjective. Okay? X++ doesn't mean the concept is incremental. It's iterative. It can be transformative. So what are some favorite adjectives you like to use in your work? Distributed, hierarchical, what else?
Faster.
Sorry?
Faster.
Faster, progressive, sorry?
Scalable.
Scalable. What are some new ones?
Mobile.
Mobile,
Low power.
low power, democratized, personalized, green, right? And take your, you can always add the word deep nowadays, and people think it's smarter. They think you're using deep learning. And this bag of adjectives can actually transform how you think about new ideas. And as I said, it's not about just incremental ideas. These are transformative ideas. And then I'm going to take an example of Jess Shields' flow control idea, which is actually used in gaming, but actually applies really well when you're a professor or when you're a student, or when you're learning new things, right? There are a couple of ways to learn. You have skills on one axis. You are acquiring skills over time, and you're being challenged to use those skills. I would say the traditional route is you learn over time and you start applying them for given challenges. So let's say you're at A1 and you want to reach A4. Clearly A4 is better than A1, and you're still going to be sufficiently happy because your skills and challenges are matched. But there are multiple ways to go from A1 to A4, right? You could take a lot of classes and learn, and eventually start applying it. That's going through A2. Or you could jump into a new field or a new challenge over here and then try to learn what you need to do to get there. And this is the new paradigm, I think, as a professor, I'm realizing that if you're too much to the right, it's boredom. If you're too much to the top left, it's stress, right? And if you're somewhere close enough, you can match the comfort and excitement. So the question is, are we going to learn by excitement or learn through boredom and comfort? And I think in today's world, we have an opportunity. I mean, often I get students coming to me and saying, I learned this new skill that I, Ramesh, have no clue, and I have to go and chase and learn with my group to keep up with it. So I think I learned this at Carolina very well. We're often in this zone over here, learning completely new concepts, working on a big problem, nano manipulator, Russ's project. Wow, so crazy. I had to learn everything from AFM to rendering, amazing things. And I think we have to keep this picture in mind when I think Mark was talking earlier about how the curriculum has to keep up with new challenges. And I would say, in addition to curriculum, we have to put our students through those challenges as well, right away, as opposed to letting them take classes for 2-3 years and then get started. So my idea hexagon was also a shortcut to get into the excitement and a little bit of an anxiety mode. And that also brings me back to how we did PhD back in late 90s. I think back then you're supposed to be solo and you're supposed to work multi-year on a problem. And I think in today's world, that's not how impact is made. You usually have teams, and they go through iterations, and they fail fast, and they make very swift progress. So I think there's something fundamentally undersatisfying in today's PhD programs. And if you can bring some fun and excitement of working in teams, and instead of defining PhD by one project over 4 or 5 years, if it's a culmination of sequence of challenges, I think it'll be very, very exciting. And hopefully we'll get fewer drop-offs of our students running to the startups, which is fine as well. All right, so strategy number 5. Be a teenager, be a rebel, do exactly opposite of what everybody else is doing, okay? Now, Fosbury flop is exactly opposite of a straddle method for high jump. And in the 60s, Fosbury realized that American colleges are replacing sandpit with foam rubber. And so he said, instead of landing on arm and legs, I can just land on my back. And he came up with this really bizarre method of running up, twisting his body, and then going over his back. Long story short, he went on to win the gold in Olympics, and now everybody uses the Fosbury method. Now think about this. In the whole ecosystem of an athlete, their diet, their training, their coaching, how they run up, how they land, how they, of all the things, one tiny thing had changed. The sandpit was replaced by foam rubber. And that completely transformed the world of high jump because Fosbury realized he can do it. So for us, we read in a newspaper, we see some announcement, and we, think it's exciting. Or we talk to a colleague and they have this really interesting idea or a new paper or a new technique. And we say, that's fantastic, congratulations. But I think those are the moments, very subtle, that are going to change our world over time. And so we have to be ready for that Fosbury moment, the foam rubber moment, and grab it. So to me, the Fosbury moment, the foam rubber moment, was the announcement of extremely high resolution displays on mobile phones. Now, at 300 plus DPI, the pixels are just a few tenths of micrometer. And you can use them in interesting ways. So if you think about eye care, slit lamps, devices that haven't changed for many years. If you want to do a retinal scan, these are devices that cost $250,000. But check out the user interface for this device. If the first time the nurse doesn't get a good picture of my retina, what she will do? She's going to use my head as her mouse and press it even harder, hoping she will get that picture. It's totally ridiculous and lost in phoropter to get your eyeglasses. So we created this new technique called iNetra, which implements a Shock-Hartman wavefront sensor by using a prismatic splitting of light in front of a mobile phone. So it's the same principle, but doing exactly opposite of what everybody else is doing. Instead of shining light into the eye, they're asking the user to look into a display. And by doing that, we're able to solve this issue of calculating the prescription for your eyeglasses by simply by a simple user interaction. Now, it's not just about blurry vision, but children don't go to school because they cannot read because of the glasses, or grown-ups cannot do their job, and that leads to poverty and illiteracy. And some just cannot see, Ronaldinho kick that goal in HD, right? So it's a huge socioeconomic problem of how you're going to provide these solutions. So I'm very proud that this technique eventually was spun out from a lab and is out there called iNetra. But that brings me to our final strategy, which is, hey, if we can use mass use technologies like mobile phones and so on to solve a critical problem that 40% of the population needs, what else can we do with this, right? So given this nail of solving eye conditions, what are some other hammers we can bring to this problem? So I and my team had 20 different ideas of what we can do with cataracts and tear films and lazy eye and squint eye and visually challenged people, people who are blind and so on. And we said, wow, this is going to take forever if we do this in our lab, one project, one PhD thesis at a time. It could take us 20 years. And I was talking to Gary earlier about some of the things you thought will be used just by visually challenged, but in fact it gets used by a lot of other people, right? Same thing with captioning, on TV shows. It gets used for everybody else. So we thought there's something we can do about this. And this is kind of my lab, my students, everybody has a 3D printer. I mean, these guys are having fun, right? But that's not going to translate into solutions that the world needs. They need to be much closer to these problems. And that brings us back to this notion of next 5 billion. Emerging worlds, emerging data, emerging technologies. What can we do about that? So we created a new platform called RedX, Rethinking Engineering, Design, and Execution. And we thought, let's go closer to the problem. If they are visually challenged in developing countries, and 1/3 of the blind in the world are in India. Okay? And 80% of that blindness is actually preventable. Cataracts, glaucoma, and so on. So we thought, let's target that. So we brought a whole team from MIT and Boston area, and we said, let's try to solve a lot of these problems together. And we did, of course, taught a class at MIT on this, brought some of the leading experts from Boston area hospitals and our hospitals. And we said, these are some 20 problems we want to attack, built initial prototypes, and we worked with local innovators who started working with us in implementing them, executing them, and doing user trials. So this is a very interesting outcome. So we have an innovation center now, which is funded by philanthropic money. And let me show you a video of how this process works. So we have students and researchers from Boston area traveling with us, working with hundreds of innovators, trying to solve this problem over weeks, over months, and through internships. And this one is a device for Braille. And they work with the hospitals locally. And so these innovators are working locally with folks who are visually challenged. They understand the socioeconomic conditions. They understand their daily life. They're working with doctors who thought this is the way it should be done using Western technology, but now they realize it could be done with mobile phones, and so on. And these innovators that we actually we send a call worldwide, and a lot of people just come and join us to work with us. And we give them internships and so on. And they are focusing on how these problems can be solved. So it's a scaling a lot of the ideas that are coming from my circle. And once we realized this is a nail that you can solve problems by working with local innovators, we said, why stop for the eye and blindness? We can go in other directions for hearing and hearing challenged, for oral and oral cancer issues, sleep and sleep disorder problems, and so on. So this is the interesting framework that has come together for me. It has just transformed in the last 3 or 4 years. And when I look at the Maze days here, and so many things we did when I was here in Chapel Hill, was fantastic. The outreach was such an important part of going to grad school here. It was just mind-blowing. And in that sense, I think we also have to put a different hat. You know, when we are working with the next 5 billion, it's not just about saving lives, or it's not about treating emerging countries as emerging markets, but this can be true partners. People in emerging countries can be our true partners to take some of our ideas and transform them into solutions, but also for us to go there and learn new research problems, new problem statements, and come back and explore here. So I think the global education is going to be a key part. So after doing all this, we said, let's go crazy, one step higher, and target Kumbh Mela, which is frankly a huge endeavor. 30 million people in 30 days, very colorful, very beautiful festival of pilgrimage, but also a lot of challenges because the cities are simply not set up to cope with this. And so we're going in with one simple strategy, which is let's not think about smart cities, but let's think about smart citizens. Because world over, citizens are becoming digital much faster than organizations. And we have great examples in this country, whether it's Uber or Airbnb, or Waze or Zillow. I think the self-configuring citizens are playing a very important role. And using that strategy, we are targeting various issues in health and housing and transactions and payments, food and food logistics, transport, civic, and using the similar idea of local innovators. So we have a city of 2 million people who's going to host this pilgrimage for 30 million, working with us, with city engaged, all the city officials engaged, and they're expecting us to provide this bottom-up innovation. So the next camp, so we have done this 4 times already. The next camp is in early July, so I welcome all of you to come and work with us. It's an open platform for anybody, and the Kumbh Mela itself is in late August and September. So come to any one of those 2 if you're interested in global challenges. All right, so we talked about the idea hexagon. We talked about the intersection of emerging technologies and emerging worlds. Well, it all came together for me when I saw this woman outside Hyderabad. You know, this is a real entrepreneur. She has taken the technology of a weighing scale and converted that into a business. I mean, look at the entrance to her store, right? She's very, very proud of what she's doing. She's very serious about it. I think for all of us in this room, we never know how the technology and the solutions we create are going to appear in other parts of the world. We don't know what we learn and which Fosbury moments will transform not only us, but people out there. And so when it comes to the next 5 billion, I think we all need a new mental framework to generate ideas, work with local population, and really make this a global world. Thank you.
So time for a few questions.
So you seem to imply that incremental is the opposite of transformative. Sometimes an idea is technically incremental.
Yes.
And an application-wise transformative.
Absolutely.
Arguably, web is an example of that.
Absolutely.
And it may take less than 5 minutes to explain what the innovation is. How do you deal with that tension when you choose projects, when you get them funded, and I get reviewer comments, there's no pure science here? So this is the tension we are facing in today's brave new world. The possibilities are so many.
Yeah. So the question was, how do you distinguish incremental that could actually be very transformative, and how do you choose projects? So I have a whole other talk that I give to my students and other places of how to choose a project. And I think we have to just let 1,000 flowers bloom. I think our model that we have, that a single PhD student should work on a single problem for a very long time, is now questionable, given the rate at which we can build things and experiment, and the whole world is our lab. And we should be constantly trying to deploy these things and have this very fail fast, think big mentality. When it comes to funding, I think we can talk over beers about that.
Question.
How do you avoid, and this may be related, but how do you avoid potentially transformative technologies that may wind up being the next Edsel or Google Glass?
Right.
Is there a way to foresee that?
I think
it's too transformative.
Yeah. So the question that Leonard was asking was, what if what you're working on is a dud? And we have to worry about it. And my philosophy is better to do something than not do it. So it's better to work on something that could become a dud, as long as you believe that this could be transformative. And you always have second chances. So I would not shy away from doing something ambitious and something big, especially if you can afford it. So I think education institutes can afford it. Big research labs can afford it on the West Coast. And I think it's perfectly fine to do it. I would rather have 1,000 people trying out 1,000 different things than people saying no. Let's not do this. So let's go and try things. There's nothing wrong. And if you think about in the bigger scheme of things, the cost of education, the cost of trying is negligible compared to the cost of execution. So you'll have enough time to figure out whether it's something you should actually execute. That's my philosophy. So this parallel innovation is the key. I think the word is parallel as opposed to serial. So at an individual level as well as at an organizational level. Yes, Ron?
So Ramesh, how do you think the PhD should change for the model? I mean, I remember when you and I were grad students, we even had this issue. We work in teams. We work collaboratively, but if we want to get a PhD, we had to break off something and work multi-years on something that we can claim our own. And even when I see people who are going for tenure-track positions, they're judged on that. They always say, oh, they worked in that group, but what does he or she, what does she bring to the table? It's all set up that way in academia, but you're pointing out that even that, no, it's much more team and speed. So what should change? You're a professor now. What's the...
Yeah, so Ron's question is, how can he update the amazing document he wrote on how to do a PhD?
Right.
So first of all, Ron's document on how to do a PhD is a mandatory read in my group. It's in the orientation program. But I think your question is, at UNC, we had this great culture of working together. We were forced to be together in the late 90s because the big machines were there and the big instruments were there. And now it's becoming very virtual. People can work from anywhere. And I don't know what the culture is at UNC, but at MIT, definitely this is a huge issue because a lot of labs are empty and people are just working from somewhere else. And I think there is no easy answer. I'm just raising the question here that I think at UNC we had more of a culture of working in teams when I was here because we worked on a very ambitious project. In the end, you still need to create something of your own and branch out. Of course, there's a danger that if you keep working in the team all the time, then you're always in a shell, right? So you have to branch out and do something. So the classic T that everybody talks about, having enough breadth but also depth in a specific area is very important. But I think it's a debate that we need to have if we have to have an impact-driven research program.
Just a parallel follow-up on that. Sometimes in industry, where you end up is on a team.
Right.
If you justified your employment based on your individual standing out, that may actually not be realistic even for where you're ending up. And they may in fact want to know, are you the kind of person that can communicate and work with divergent technologies and bring them together or not? Or are you going to be a soloist even when you get to business?
Absolutely. I think I have another plot I didn't show of on horizontal axis is pessimist and optimist, and the other axis is paranoid and laid back. And I think when you're a grad student, you are laid back and some optimist when you start, and then by the time you end, you are laid back and pessimist. And the world only cares about people who are optimists but also paranoid, which seems like a two contradicting emotions of being an optimist and paranoid, but those are the only people who survive, as somebody told us. So how do we transition from those phases of optimism, pessimism, laid back, and being paranoid is very key. And I mean, there is no doubt that we have to work in teams and learn from there. And I think that's why sometimes the startups are very exciting because it's very democratized. Everybody's equal. The founders are sitting with the new employees, and I think the more of that we bring to our culture, we can learn. And I was actually very pleasantly surprised at how much emphasis there is on entrepreneurship at UNC. When I was here, I think it was exciting, but it was always kind of a second-class citizen, and now it's a first-class citizen. So that's fantastic.
One last question. We are running out of time. Okay, if not, thank you, Ramesh. It's amazing to see. We heard from Mark Levoy, who got his breakthrough in volume rendering at 4 a.m. working alone in the building, to Ramesh talking about teams. It's great to hear these wonderful events. So we have now 5 panel sessions. We go back to Citizen and Brooks, 5 panel session, exciting topics, and hope you like them. Thank you again, everybody.